right, while all eyes are on the budget, there is still plenty out there today to get across. So joining me now is Sky News' Brisbane Bureau Chief, Adam Walters, and Managing Director of Adoni Media, Lisa Goddard. Well, thank you. Welcome to you both. I appreciate your time very much. Let's get started with the Housing Affordability Fund. It was a centrepiece of Labor's election campaign, and it's now heading for a Senate showdown. Housing Minister Julie Collins will put the bill to a vote this week, with or without the Greens and crossbench support, who steadfastly opposed Labor's proposal on the grounds that it doesn't go far enough. Lisa, this is a bold strategy here by Labor. Will the Greens and the Teals continue to oppose it?
Look, we all know this was an election promise from Labor, so they want this to go through. But let's be very clear. The Greens, when they fought back on this and said they would not debate, they knocked it back in March, so they would not debate it further in the Senate. And the Prime Minister Albanese very clearly came out and said, well, look, I'm happy to take this to the next election. So now he's had a rethink on that strategy and the idea of pushing it back to the Senate again and having them try to discuss it and make this decision and risk a possible double dissolution. He's really putting some political pressure on the Greens there. But look, at the end of the day, the Greens are putting in demands for an extra $5 billion. And they're calling for a rent freeze. Now, that isn't even in the purview of the federal government. That's a state and territory issue. So at the moment, you've got the Greens playing politics and yet out in the streets, and we've just felt the first part of winter in this country in the last few nights, you've got people living in tents. So if the Greens are really committed to helping get people off the wait list and into homes, and look, here in Queensland, we have 28,000 people who are on that wait list for affordable social housing. The Greens are serious. They need to get in there and make some serious, have some serious discussions with the government and get this through.
Strikes me they'll just do what they always do, and that's grandstand to the hilt and then wave it through. But Adam, if the bill is knocked back by the Senate twice within 3 months, with 3 months in between, it sets up a trigger for a double dissolution election in the Senate. But how likely a prospect do you think it is that Labor would pull the trigger on that?
I don't think it's likely at all. We've seen a lot of sabre rattling from the Greens on other issues before any differences with Labor are sorted out behind closed doors after these very public debates. But you'd have to wonder if the placation of the junior party and this wobbly alliance means engaging in some sort of horse trading when it comes to accelerating the government's decarbonisation targets, and how much of a price Labor is prepared to pay when it comes to the number of jobs that will be threatened in the energy sector in the drive towards zero emissions. We had a union leader from the energy and mining sector recently, Tony Marr, come out and say that through the profound economic restructuring underway, there is a critical element missing, that is support for the workers. So if the Labor Party and the Greens are going to go off and sort out this housing legislation among themselves, you've got to wonder what the real price to pay will be.
Yeah, they could face a really quite uncomfortable wedge between that traditional working base and the inner city Green types who they've been courting in recent times. Lisa, it's been a terrible start for the New South Wales National Party in this new political term, with Paul Toole being dumped as leader and Dubbo MP Dougal Saunders replacing him on the eve of the Parliament's first sitting week. What do you make of it?
Well, it really is a mess of the making of Chris Minns. He's dumped the National Party completely in this because he tapped, if you want to see nepotism at play, he's tapped Ben Franklin in, and who's now been elected as President of the Upper House. And so now you've got the Nats there having this internal infighting. And not only that, their new leader now coming out and suggesting that there's an identity crisis within the Nats, because he's said today that, look, people pretty much don't really know who the Nats are or what they stand for. And I think his quote was something along the lines of, they think they're people standing in a paddock chewing straw. And his mission now is to try to reinvigorate the Nats in New South Wales. But look, we just saw what the coalition went through, what the Libs and the Nats went through in the lead up to the election. If they are going to be a strong opposition, then they all need to get their act together, because at the moment, this is just serving up Minns on a platter.
Adam, we saw the harm that instability did to the previous New South Wales Liberal government. It really is, as Lisa says, a gift to Labor. How can the Nats turn this around quickly?
Well, just in terms of the coalition generally in New South Wales, it's better to sort themselves out sooner than later. They've still got almost 4 years to go before the next election. Yes, it has been messy for the coalition so far, but to have 11 women announced today on the front bench is a solid start to building a brighter future, I think. It's been interesting to see the brand new MP, Kelly Sloan, the former TV presenter, made Shadow Environment Minister after a strong Teals candidate was credited with a 7.7% swing from the Liberal Party in the battle for the eastern suburb seat of Wallara. As for the Nationals, they have been unstable for so long, Amanda. The John Barilaro Jobs for the Boys scandal sent them to a new low. And now they've been unravelled by claims that the Nationals MP, Ben Franklin, has given the concept of a sinecure a novel twist after being offered that highly paid upper house job by his good friend and the Labor Premier, Chris Minns. You couldn't make this stuff up.
Well, I guess the start of a new term of opposition is the time to clean house, so let's hope they get to it. Let's go to a story I think all three of us are sadly too familiar with, and that's the high rates of youth crime in Queensland. We've all been shaken in recent weeks by that horror crash in Maryborough that claimed 3 lives, allegedly at the hands of a 13-year-old in a stolen car. And then over the weekend, the anti-crime protest in Rockhampton escalated. No one wants to see the formation of vigilante mobs. Adam, you've covered this extensively. Do you think we've reached something of a tipping point?
Indeed, the vigilante response we witnessed in Rockhampton this week was led by a former One Nation candidate targeting the house he claimed to be the home of a teenage home invader who had terrorised his sister and child. Now, some saw this episode as a boiling point for community anger. The police, on the other hand, described the act of taking the law into their own hands as dangerous, and they'll be examining footage of the protests to see if any of the vigilantes were in fact breaking the law. Earlier this year, the Palaszczuk government introduced Safer Communities legislation that overrides Queensland's Human Rights Act to make breach of bail an offence for children. The government doesn't need disturbing internal polling to know this issue is damaging its re-election prospects. The deaths of those 3 innocent women allegedly at the hands of a 13-year-old car thief near Wide Bay last week has only intensified calls for a harsh response, including a call from the police union to name and shame offenders, Amanda.
Yeah, and it's not the first death at the hands of youth violence. Lisa, last week, Premier Palaszczuk basically threw her hands in the air as she said, no one's going to stop youth crime. Is this admission one of failure across all of the policy areas that feed into crime? Everything from child safety to the courts to education, intergenerational family dysfunction and drug abuse?
Well, Amanda, we know that the 13-year-old who's accused of being behind the wheel of that stolen car that killed those 3 people in Maryborough, was under the care of the state. So there are serious questions being asked about what more needs to be done. And as Adam said, youth crime here is a key issue. It was a key issue before the last election. It wasn't enough to turn the tables when it came to North Queensland. But now, as you say, we're seeing vigilante groups out there. And we have the police commissioner here saying, look, unfortunately, warning people against this, saying, unfortunately, it's only a matter of time before we may see a death. So it is getting really serious. And on the Sunshine Coast, we saw a home burnt down, and that was allegedly the result of a vigilante-type attack after a young teenage girl was attacked there. So it is turning particularly nasty, and there is increased pressure on the Palaszczuk government to do something. And to the point where we've now got a former Labor minister coming out and saying, well, perhaps it's time for more of a bipartisan approach to this and bring in and have a standing committee that looks into youth crime, because at the moment what they're doing clearly is not enough, and there is a lot of anger in the community. So look, they've got an election coming up in October next year. It'll be youth crime and health, I'm predicting, that will be the 2 hot issues that will need to be debated.
Lisa, Adam, thank you both very much for your insights.